it were you. It was always you.
I remember the exact moment the priest froze. I could see it in his eyes before anyone else noticed. The sudden hitch in his breath, the slight tremble in his hands as he clutched the ceremonial book. And then the entire aisle seemed to tilt beneath me. Time slowed, and for a brief, impossible moment, everything in the grand cathedral faded to silence except for the pounding of my own heart. I was walking my daughter down the aisle, and yet somehow the air was thick with a tension I hadn't been prepared for. "Father, are you okay?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He wasn't okay. Not with me there. Not now. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 62 years old, and I had thought I knew my life, my family, and the very path that led to this day. But that morning, as I took those careful steps in my silver gown, glimmering under the crystal chandeliers, I realized how wrong I had been. The betrayal had been brewing quietly for years, but today it had a face. My daughter, my precious Clara, was smiling radiantly in her wedding dress, holding tightly onto me, as if she had always needed me to be her anchor. But even her smile couldn't mask the tension in her eyes. Something was off, very off. I'd been excluded from every wedding planning detail. Invitations, seating arrangements, rehearsal dinners, all of it orchestrated without me. I overheard whispers from my own family that morning, a hushed conversation in the garden while I was adjusting Clara's veil. Richard, my son-in-law to be, was chuckling quietly with my estranged sister, Marlene, and the words, "mother of the bride drama," drifted to me like smoke. I swallowed the sharp taste of hurt and disbelief. I had raised Clara with love, sacrificed for her, stood by her when no one else did. And here, at her wedding, I was made to feel invisible. When I first learned that Richard didn't want me walking Clara down the aisle, I thought it was a misunderstanding. I thought perhaps he was nervous or that someone had twisted words. But now, as the priest's gaze locked on me, frozen mid-sentence, I understood this wasn't just exclusion. It was something darker, something personal. The betrayal was deliberate. The congregation murmured quietly, sensing the sudden disruption. I could feel their eyes, some curious, some judgmental, all fixated on the single unfolding moment. I looked down the aisle at Clara, who squeezed my arm, whispering, "Mom, it's okay. It's okay." But her words felt fragile, barely holding against the weight of everything else. I took a deep breath and forced myself to continue. Step by step, I moved forward. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor, a steady rhythm against the chaotic storm inside me. And then, as if on cue, Richard turned to greet me with that insincere smile that made my stomach twist. "Evelyn," he said, voice dripping with forced politeness. "I wasn't expecting you here so early." "I'm here to walk my daughter," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough for him to flinch. The words hung in the air, and I caught the flicker of panic in his eyes. He hadn't anticipated this confrontation, not today, not here, and certainly not in front of witnesses. Marlene, sitting 2 rows ahead with her perfectly coiffed hair and matching designer dress, shot me a look that could have frozen fire. She whispered to Richard, "You didn't think she'd actually come, did you?" I smiled faintly, not for them, but for myself. The thing about betrayal is that it's always more painful when you see the smugness in the faces of those who perpetrated. I wanted to tell them exactly what I thought. I wanted to shout every truth that had been simmering inside me for years. But I kept walking, letting my presence speak louder than any words. As I approached the altar, I noticed Clara's hands trembling slightly. "Mom, please," she said, her voice barely audible over the quiet gasps from the congregation. Just, just walk with me." And I did, because no matter what Richard, Marlene, or anyone else thought, I was Clara's mother and she needed me. The priest cleared his voice, finally finding his voice, though it was still brittle. "Ladies and gentlemen, we shall begin the ceremony." His eyes darted between me and Richard as if searching for a way to make this moment disappear. I caught the faint tightening of his jaw. He knew something, though he couldn't articulate it. And then it hit me, the depth of their betrayal. I realized that the exclusion from planning, the whispered jokes at my expense, the subtle manipulations over the years wasn't just about me being a difficult mother. It was calculated. And it wasn't just Richard. Marlene had been feeding this venom for years, seeding doubt, twisting my reputation, making sure that when the day came, I would be humiliated. But I wouldn't. Not today. I took Clara's hand firmly in mine, squeezing it for reassurance. "It's just us now, sweetie," I whispered. Her eyes met mine, and in that fleeting connection, I felt something I hadn't in years. The quiet strength of being a mother who refused to be erased. But even as I reached the altar, the whispers continued. Guests nudged each other, casting sideways glances, some whispering, "Who's that woman?" "Her! She's the mother?" Every whisper was a knife, every glance a reminder of the isolation I had endured in my own family. And yet I kept my head high. Richard's face turned pale as the realization sank in that I wouldn't be cowed. He thought he controlled the narrative. He thought the day would be about him, his family, his perfect little plan. But I was here. I had arrived. I was standing tall in front of everyone, and in that moment, I had all the power. I looked at the priest once more, saw the hesitation lingering in his gaze, and felt a shiver of satisfaction. He knew I had the upper hand, even if only silently. And as I adjusted Clara's veil, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, I whispered softly, "You'll never humiliate me again. Not today, not ever." The congregation remained tense, sensing that something monumental had just happened, though they didn't yet understand the layers of betrayal and history intertwined in this moment. But I did. Every cruel word, every deliberate slight, every hidden insult had led to this. And now they were all watching me, powerless, as I stood there, calm, dignified, and unbroken. I could feel the weight of years pressing down, memories of arguments, dismissals, and whispered slights from my own flesh and blood. And yet amid the suffocating tension, there was clarity. I knew that whatever came next, whatever Richard, Marlene, or anyone else tried, they would never erase me from this day. Because I was here, I was present, and I was my daughter's mother. Even if the situation seemed hopeless before, even if I had been sidelined and mocked for years, in that moment, walking her down the aisle, I realized something essential. Sometimes the smallest act of presence is the loudest declaration of power. And today, I declared it. As I stood at the altar holding Clara's hand, I caught Richard's eyes once more. They were hard, calculating, but now edged with something else. Fear, or maybe the realization that I wasn't the naive mother he had hoped to sideline. He straightened, forcing a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Evelyn, we just wanted," he started, fumbling. I shook my head slowly, cutting him off before he could spin another lie. You just wanted me gone, Richard. That's the truth. My voice was steady, quiet enough not to alarm the congregation, but sharp enough that only he could hear the venom in it. I saw Marlene stiffen in her seat. Her fingers tightened around her designer clutch, nails digging in as if trying to anchor herself against the truth I had just thrown at them. She whispered something to her friend, though I couldn't make it out. Probably something mocking. But I was done hiding my awareness of their games. Clara squeezed my hand. "Mom, please, let's not ruin my day," she whispered, eyes glistening. I nodded, letting a soft sigh escape me. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about making sure Clara could walk this aisle with dignity, without feeling the undercurrent of hatred that had plagued our family for years. Yet I could see the ripples of tension spreading through the guests. My presence had unsettled everyone. My own family, Richard's family, even the priest who still hadn't fully recovered from the shock of seeing me there. Whispers like rustling leaves surrounded me. Who is she really? Why is she here now? Didn't she cause trouble years ago? Every question hung in the air, unspoken but understood. I let it wash over me. I would not retreat. After a moment, the priest finally cleared his throat, shakily beginning the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." His voice trailed off when his eyes found mine again, and I could sense his internal struggle. I had heard of priests freezing under pressure, but I never imagined I would witness it, especially on my daughter's wedding day. Step by step, Clara and I moved forward. The delicate lace of her gown brushed my arm, and I felt a pang of love mixed with sorrow. I had raised this girl alone after her father walked out when she was only 3. I had weathered late nights, broken promises, and endless sacrifices just to give her a life of stability. And here I was, facing betrayal from those closest to me in the most public way possible. I caught snippets of conversation behind me. Marlene was whispering something fierce, probably accusing me of showing up uninvited, of trying to steal the spotlight. Richard's face twitched in irritation, a vein pulsing on his temple. I could practically feel the panic rolling off of them in waves. They expected compliance, a quiet resignation, a mother who stayed in the shadows. They had miscalculated. At the altar, I knelt beside Clara to adjust her veil one last time. "Remember, darling, your day is yours, not theirs, not anyone's. Walk proudly, smile, and don't let them touch your joy." She nodded, a tiny quiver of courage in her eyes. For a moment, she looked more like the little girl I carried through tough nights than the radiant bride she was about to become. And it struck me how fragile this joy was, surrounded by so much deceit and bitterness. Richard finally spoke up, voice sharp but controlled. "Evelyn, I appreciate that you're here, but perhaps—" I raised my hand, silencing him. "No, not perhaps. Today I am here, whether you like it or not. This is my daughter's wedding, and I will not be invisible." His jaw tightened, and I saw his fingers curl into fists hidden beneath his sleeves. He wasn't used to confrontation, especially not from someone he thought he could control. Marlene leaned forward slightly, her whisper venomous. "This is exactly why you've been a problem your whole life. You can't let anything go." I could see the small, cruel smirk in her eyes, the satisfaction of finally seeing me flustered. But I wasn't flustered. I was calm. And calm, I realized, was more terrifying to them than any outburst. As the ceremony proceeded, my thoughts drifted to the years of calculated manipulation. Every time I had tried to maintain a relationship, Marlene had undermined me. Every dinner, every holiday gathering, every family conversation had been laced with her subtle jabs and sly comments. And Richard had played along, acting like the perfect fiancé, the devoted family man, all while plotting behind the scenes to humiliate me publicly. And now, here they were, in front of dozens of witnesses, their plan collapsing quietly around them as I simply existed, walked and smiled. Smiled because despite all the betrayal, despite the pain, I had not lost myself. Not today. And in that fragile victory, I found the strength to endure what was coming next, even if I didn't yet know the full extent of the treachery surrounding me.
The ceremony ended with polite applause, but the tension never fully left the air. Guests smiled and clinked glasses, but I could feel the undercurrent, the sharp, hidden glances, the subtle whispers, the cold calculations behind polished smiles. Clara stood beside me, radiant and glowing, her hands still in mine, but even she felt the strain. She leaned close and whispered, "Mom, it's fine. Really." I nodded, but I couldn't ignore the storm that was quietly brewing. After the ceremony, the reception hall was buzzing. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above. The polished wooden floors reflected the warm light, and a string quartet played softly in the background. But I could see the tension thickening in Richard's jaw and Marlene's posture. They were furious, though no one outside of our immediate circle could fully grasp why. I could sense their fury and scheming energy, and I knew that the rising conflict wasn't going to end with a polite dinner. Richard approached me with that stiff, forced smile. "Evelyn, perhaps we should step outside and talk privately," he suggested, but there was nothing private about the venom dripping from his tone. I let him lead me toward a quiet corner, maintaining my calm, careful smile. "Richard, you know why I'm here. You know why I didn't stay away," I said, my voice low but firm. "This isn't about spoiling Clara's day. It's about respect, something you've never shown me." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Respect? You think showing up unannounced, embarrassing us in front of everyone is respect?" His hand gestured vaguely toward the hall, toward the guests who had just witnessed our little confrontation. "You're a fool if you think this was dignified." I let him talk, silently counting each insult as it hit. "And yet, I've done more for Clara and her 28 years than you or Marlene ever will. And that is why I'm standing here, Richard. Not to fight, not to humiliate you, but because I refuse to be erased." He clenched his fists, knuckles white. "You're impossible, Evelyn." "Impossible?" I echoed, letting a faint, mirthless smile touch my lips. "Or unstoppable?" At that moment, Marlene appeared at his side, arms crossed, clearly enjoying every word. "Mother of the bride drama at its finest," she sneered, loud enough that our little corner of the room became a stage. Didn't think she had it in her to show up looking presentable, though. She smirked as if her compliment disguised the contempt, and I felt my stomach twist with a mix of fury and disappointment. I didn't reply. I let Clara's happiness and dignity guide me, but inside, my mind raced. This wasn't just about this day. It was about years of manipulation, years of disrespect, and years of watching them twist narratives to suit their needs. And now, after years of being sidelined, I finally understood the extent of their control. The tension escalated further when the family started their toasts. Richard's best man stood, glass in hand, and delivered a speech filled with vague compliments and forced humor. But every joke about family quirks and mother-in-law antics was a jab in my direction. I held my composure, but I could feel the rising heat in my chest. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every sly comment was an attempt to humiliate me publicly. After the toast, the photographer gathered everyone for pictures. As I positioned myself beside Clara, I caught Marlene giving me the coldest look I had ever seen. "Try not to steal the spotlight too much, Evelyn," she hissed under her breath. Her words were meant to wound,
but I let them slide like water off my skin. Yet the most painful part was Clara's silence. She hadn't confronted Marlene or Richard. She hadn't defended me, and I could see the tiny flicker of fear in her eyes. Fear, guilt, and confusion. They were all there, tucked behind her radiant smile. "Mom, let's just enjoy today," she whispered again. But I knew she felt the tension too. Later, as the night progressed, the conflicts deepened. During dinner, Richard insisted on controlling every conversation at the table, steering topics away from me. "Evelyn, why don't you sit with your friends?" he suggested, tone polite but dripping with condescension. I shook my head. "No, Richard, I'm family. I belong here." He smirked, clearly irritated. "Family doesn't always need to impose itself," he replied smoothly, as if he had delivered a clever quip. "You mean when it's inconvenient for you?" I shot back quietly, ensuring only he heard. My words barely registered to the others, but I could see him tighten. That small, private moment of confrontation was enough to unsettle him. Marlene leaned across the table, her voice sharp. "Evelyn, must you always make everything a scene? Can't you just sit down and enjoy the event?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "I am enjoying the event, Marlene. I'm enjoying the fact that I am here, present, and not being silenced. That is my enjoyment." The tension between us was palpable. Every word, every glance, every breath in the room seemed charged with conflict. I could sense the undercurrent of control and manipulation that Richard and Marlene tried to maintain. It wasn't just a wedding. They were used to having power over me, over my voice, over my life. And now, in this room filled with witnesses, that power had been challenged. As the night wore on, the cracks in their facade became more evident. Small arguments over seating arrangements, unspoken grievances, and carefully hidden grudges started bubbling to the surface. I watched silently, taking in every detail, the way Richard's jaw twitched when someone complimented me, the way Marlene's smile faltered when I shared a quiet joke with Clara. They were unraveling, though they didn't yet realize it. And then came the whisper I had been dreading. One of Richard's friends leaned close and muttered, "I heard she's controlling, manipulative. She's the reason their family never really got along." It wasn't just a lie. It was their narrative, crafted over decades, meant to isolate me. I felt the familiar sting of injustice, but also a flicker of determination. Let them think what they want. The truth would reveal itself eventually. By the end of the night, the reception felt like a battlefield masked by celebration. I could see who my allies were: Clara, her closest friends, a few family members who still recognized my integrity. But I could also see the growing opposition, the subtle plotting in the corners of the room. Richard and Marlene were not done. Their cruelty would extend beyond this night. I could feel it in every calculated gesture, every forced smile, every deliberate slight. And yet, amid the chaos, I held on to one truth. I was not powerless. I may have been underestimated for years, but I had witnessed their arrogance, their overconfidence, and their lack of foresight. I would need patience, strategy, and courage. They believed they had won, but the rising conflict tonight was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. And by the time the final song played and guests began to leave, I knew that this was far from over. The betrayal had layers yet to uncover. The disrespect, the manipulation, the cruelty, it all pointed to something deeper, something I had yet to fully see. And in that moment, as Clara hugged me tightly, whispering her love and thanks, I made a silent vow. I would face whatever came next, and I would do so with quiet, unyielding strength. Because they may have tried to control the story, to humiliate me, to erase my presence, but they hadn't counted on me surviving it. They hadn't counted on me planning my own quiet, unstoppable response. And soon, they would learn that the mother they underestimated had already begun her next move.
The day after the wedding, the aftermath of tension lingered like a thick fog. Clara was radiant in photos, smiling, radiant, but I could see the strain behind her eyes whenever she glanced at Richard. And I knew, just as surely as I knew the sun would rise, that the conflict had only just begun. That morning, I received a text from Marlene, sharp and biting as always. "Evelyn, you should have stayed away. Clara deserved a peaceful wedding. Try not to ruin the honeymoon, too." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to respond with every word I'd ever kept inside, but instead, I typed a simple reply. Peace isn't possible when betrayal runs deep. Think about that. It wasn't a dramatic comeback. It was a seed. I wanted her to feel the sting of her own actions without giving her the satisfaction of an argument. Later that day, I went to see Clara at their new apartment. She opened the door, hugging me tight. "Mom, thank you for being there. I needed you, even if I didn't show it in front of everyone." I held her, letting the warmth of our bond soothe some of the tension, though the rest of the day reminded me that nothing in this family was simple. "Clara, tell me everything," I urged gently. "Tell me what happened behind the scenes. I need to know." She hesitated, biting her lip. "It's complicated. Richard, he didn't want you there. And Marlene, she's been twisting everything you've done for me for years. She told him things, lies about you." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Lies, misrepresentations. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined, and I realized then that this wasn't just about the wedding. It had been years in the making. "Mom, I'm sorry," Clara whispered, tears welling. "I should have said something. I should have defended you." "You did what you could," I replied firmly. "What matters is that you know the truth. And now, we need to think about what comes next." The next confrontation came sooner than I expected. Richard called that afternoon, pretending to be conciliatory. "Evelyn, I think we need to clear the air," he said, voice smooth, almost charming. "Let's meet for coffee. Just you and me. No drama." I agreed, of course. I wasn't naive. I knew his charm was a trap, a way to manipulate the narrative further, to try to isolate me. But I needed to see him, to hear what he had planned, and to gather evidence if possible. We met at a small cafe, a neutral place, buzzing with quiet chatter. He arrived first, already sitting with his phone in hand, pretending casualness. "Evelyn, I really think we can move past all this. It's over now. The wedding's done. Let's just be reasonable adults." I leaned back, studying him quietly. "Reasonable adults," I repeated softly. "Don't humiliate family members publicly. Don't manipulate children against their own mother. Don't erase someone's presence for years. And yet, here you are pretending it's all forgotten." He smiled tightly. "It's in the past. I want us to have peace." I knew better. I had known better for years. "Richard, who benefits from all this tension? Tell me the truth." He looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his chair. What are you implying?" "You know exactly what I'm implying," I said, voice firm. "Marlene, you, all of you. Years of control, of manipulation, of lies. It's not over, and pretending it is only makes it worse for everyone, including Clara." For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. He leaned forward, voice low. "Evelyn, you have no idea what's at stake. You don't understand the..."
The arrangements we've made. There are consequences you can't even imagine. Consequences? I echoed. For exposing the truth? For being present? Or for finally standing up to the lies? He hesitated, swallowing hard. And in that hesitation, I realized I had an advantage. He was overconfident, used to having the upper hand, and now the cracks were showing, and I would exploit them. Not recklessly, but strategically. The first mini cliffhanger of the day arrived later that evening. I received a mysterious envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside were a series of photographs documenting private family moments, evidence of manipulations, secret dealings, and even hints that Richard had been funneling money from family accounts into off-the-books investments. My pulse quickened. This was more than betrayal. This was corruption. And finally, I held the pieces of the puzzle in my hands. Clara noticed my shock when I arrived at her apartment that evening. "Mom, what is it?" I showed her one photograph after another. Her eyes widened. "Mom, this is serious." "Yes, it is. And it's only the beginning. If we confront this the wrong way, it could backfire. But if we play it smart, we can finally reveal the truth without harming Clara or ourselves." The second mini cliffhanger of the day arrived the next day. I overheard a conversation between Richard and Marlene at a boutique downtown. They didn't see me, but I could hear every word. "She's smarter than we thought," Richard said, voice low but tense. "I underestimated her. If she figures out what we've done with the estate, the accounts, everything, she could ruin us." Marlene laughed softly, cruelly. "She's just a mother. What can she do?" I felt a shiver run down my spine, a mix of anger and anticipation. They truly didn't understand me. They believed that age, gender, or societal expectations made me powerless. But over decades, I had survived betrayals, manipulation, and heartbreak. I knew patience. I knew timing, and I knew how to strike when the moment was right. That night, I sat with Clara, whispering plans and warnings. "Clara, you need to trust me. They think they have control, but they've been reckless. We have the evidence, we have the timeline, and most importantly, we have the truth." She nodded, worry in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope. "Mom, you're always the strongest one. I don't know how you do it." "I've had to." And now, we make them realize that truth has a way of coming out, whether they like it or not. By now, the family tension was palpable. Every phone call, every dinner, every email carried an invisible threat. Richard and Marlene were overconfident, convinced that I would retreat, that I would let them continue their deception. They didn't see the storm building quietly behind my calm exterior. And as I lay awake that night, sifting through photographs and notes, I realized the depth of the challenge ahead. This wasn't just about a wedding, or public humiliation, or even stolen opportunities. This was about exposing years of lies, manipulation, and greed, all carefully orchestrated by the very people who had pretended to care for Clara and me. The rising conflict wasn't just escalating, it was multiplying, and I could feel the tension spiraling toward a breaking point. Richard and Marlene had no idea that I was already steps ahead, quietly gathering proof, planning my next move, and preparing for the moment when the full truth would hit them like a tidal wave. And in that quiet, darkened room, as the city lights flickered through the blinds, I made a silent promise. No more being sidelined. No more betrayal. No more silence. Whatever came next, I would face it with unwavering resolve. Because they believed they had won, and that was their biggest mistake. The days following the wedding felt like walking through a storm you could see coming but couldn't avoid. I moved carefully, quietly, observing every word, every gesture, every slip of the tongue from Richard and Marlene. They believed they were in control, that I was merely an obstacle they could ignore. But they had underestimated me, and that underestimation would be their undoing. I spent hours reviewing the photographs I had collected, tracing patterns, noting every irregularity in the family accounts, every subtle act of manipulation, and every lie Richard and Marlene had told over the years. As I organized the evidence, a cold clarity settled over me. I wasn't reacting, I was planning. I wasn't desperate, I was patient. And patience was my ally in a war they didn't know had begun. Clara noticed the change in me. "Mom, you're different lately," she said one evening as we sat in her apartment, sorting through old letters and documents I had found hidden in Richard's office. "You're not just angry anymore. You're focused." "I have to be," I replied softly, not looking up from a ledger where I had traced suspicious transactions. "They've spent decades hiding the truth, Clara, and if we want justice, or even peace, we can't let them intimidate us. We need a plan, and we need patience." She nodded, a little intimidated by the transformation, but I could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. It was there. Small, fragile, but unmistakable, and in that hope, I found strength. The first hint of my hidden advantage came unexpectedly. While going through some old family records, I discovered a document that Richard and Marlene had assumed I would never see. It was a financial agreement between my late husband and his family, something that had been quietly tucked away and forgotten. The terms were surprising, and the potential it held was enormous. If used correctly, it could shift the balance of power entirely. For years, I had been underestimated, sidelined, and dismissed. Now, I held leverage, quiet, powerful, and carefully concealed. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. They believed they had stripped me of influence, but in reality, they had left me exactly what I needed to turn the tide. The next confrontation came subtly, over dinner at Clara's apartment with a few trusted friends who had been quietly observing the family dynamics for years. Richard and Marlene had arranged to drop by casually, supposedly to check in on the newlyweds, but I could see the tension radiating from them the moment they arrived. "Evelyn," Richard began, voice overly smooth, "I hope you're not planning to cause trouble tonight. We just want a simple dinner with Clara, that's all." I smiled faintly, calmly placing the documents on the table. "Simple dinner?" I asked. "Funny, I thought this would be a simple visit, but you've made life quite complicated, haven't you?" Marlene's eyes narrowed. "Evelyn, I don't know what you mean." I let the paper slide closer to her, Richard, and Clara. "These," I said softly, "are the things you've been trying to hide. Financial manipulations, secret agreements, years of lies meant to control my daughter, me, and this entire family. But I've seen it all, and I've preserved it." Richard's confident smile faltered. Marlene's hand trembled slightly as she reached out to pick up a paper, but I stopped her with a calm shake of my head. "Not yet," I said. "We're not rushing. We're just observing." Clara's friends exchanged glances, silent witnesses to a drama that had been carefully concealed for decades. And in that quiet, careful observation, I felt the power of the hidden plan settling into place. Over the next few days, I began to subtly manipulate the environment. Small remarks, casual mentions of legal consultations, quiet phone calls to financial advisors, all hints, never outright confrontations. Richard and Marlene started to shift, just slightly at first, their overconfidence giving way to subtle unease. I noticed it in the way Richard avoided meeting my eyes, in the tense stiffness of Marlene's posture whenever I walked into a room. One evening, as I sorted more documents in Clara's apartment, I heard a low, deliberate knock at the door. Clara opened it, and Richard stood there, an attempt at civility on his face, but the tension radiating off him was unmistakable. "Evelyn," he began, voice measured, "I think we need to talk properly this time, away from Clara." I nodded, calmly. "Fine, let's talk." We walked to a quiet cafe, deliberately chosen for its neutrality. He spoke first, trying to mask the panic under a veneer of calm. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. These documents, these photographs, they mean nothing without context. You can't prove anything." I smiled faintly. "Context? Richard, the context has always been clear. You and Marlene have been plotting, manipulating, lying, and stealing for years. The truth doesn't need context. It needs acknowledgement. And soon, it will get it." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Evelyn, you really don't understand. There are consequences, big consequences. If this gets out—" "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice steady, unyielding, "and I also understand that you've underestimated me the last time. That mistake has a cost, and that cost will be yours to bear." He leaned back, shock flickering across his features. He had believed me naive, weak, compliant, but he was beginning to realize that I was none of those things. I was precise, patient, and methodical, and I had a plan he couldn't yet see fully. That night, as I returned to Clara's apartment, I felt a mix of anticipation and calm. The hidden plan was slowly taking shape, a careful web designed to expose the truth without endangering Clara or myself. And I knew, intuitively, with the certainty of a woman who had survived decades of betrayal, that the tipping point was approaching. Even the smallest interactions began to play into the strategy. Casual mentions of legal consuls, deliberate references to evidence I had gathered, subtle reminders of financial oversight, all planted seeds of doubt in Richard and Marlene's minds. They began to second-guess each other, to whisper behind closed doors, to wonder what I knew and how much I had already uncovered. And in that quiet tension, I felt satisfaction. But the suspense was palpable. Every step, every conversation, every subtle maneuver had to be calculated. One wrong move could alert them prematurely. One misstep, and the delicate balance of exposure and control could collapse. And yet, with each passing day, the tension grew, and so did my quiet confidence. I realized that this hidden advantage, the documents, the photographs, the carefully preserved evidence, wasn't just leverage, it was a weapon of truth, a weapon that, if used correctly, could dismantle decades of deception and manipulation. And as I lay awake that night, reviewing every step of the plan in my mind, I felt the thrill of anticipation. Richard and Marlene believed they had won. They believed they had silenced me, marginalized me, and controlled the narrative. But they had overlooked one crucial detail. I had patience, foresight, and a hidden advantage that would ensure the truth came to light on my terms, in my time. The storm was coming. The hidden plan was set. And when it unfolded, there would be no turning back for them.
The following days felt like a careful chess game, every move deliberate, every conversation calculated. Richard and Marlene were behaving oddly, overconfident, yet subtly unsettled. Their arrogance was a mistake I intended to exploit. I could see them plotting in corners, whispering to each other, their overconfidence blinding them to the fact that I already had the advantage. Clara noticed the tension as well. One evening, while we sat sorting through envelopes and statements, she said softly, "Mom, do you think they know you're on to them? I think they suspect something, but suspicion is not knowledge, and until they know exactly what I have, they are vulnerable." It was true. They had spent years believing that their control was unshakable, that every move was hidden from me. They didn't realize that patience was my ally, and that I had been quietly observing them, cataloging their every misstep, every lie, every financial manipulation. The next confrontation came at a small family gathering Clara had invited me to, a casual Sunday lunch with her closest friends. Richard and Marlene were there, smiling, acting polite, but I could see the tension in their posture, the tightness around their eyes. They were aware, at some level, that the balance had shifted, but they didn't know how much I had already uncovered. Richard started, voice smooth. "Evelyn, I hope we're not making things uncomfortable. Clara wants a relaxed afternoon." I smiled softly, letting the words hang in the air. Relaxed, yes. Comfortable, not necessarily. But that's only because truth has a way of making people uneasy, especially when they've tried to hide it. Marlene scoffed under her breath. "Always so dramatic," she muttered, clearly trying to mask her unease. But the dramatic part wasn't my intent. It was reality, and reality had a way of speaking louder than lies. Over the course of lunch, I dropped subtle hints about knowledge and oversight. I said casually, stirring my tea, "You know, it's interesting how financial arrangements can sometimes reveal more than people intend. You'd be surprised what careful records can show." Richard tensed imperceptibly, and Marlene's hand clenched around her glass. They believed they had been meticulous, hiding their manipulation perfectly. They didn't see the loose threads, the trail of deception that I had quietly followed. Clara, noticing the subtle tension, whispered, "Mom, careful." "I am," I replied softly. Careful is my middle name now. As the afternoon progressed, I noticed how even their small comments betrayed them. A mention of property here, an offhand remark about an investment there, it all added to the evidence I had already collected. And with each slip, each moment of overconfidence, I cataloged it mentally, knowing exactly how and when it would be used. Later that evening, Clara confronted me privately. "Mom, I overheard Marlene on the phone. She's talking about you, saying you're dangerous, that you've changed everything. Do you think they realize?" "I don't think they realize fully, but they are beginning to sense it. That's why they are rattled. That's why they're whispering and plotting. And that's exactly the advantage I need. Their fear of the unknown, their miscalculation. It's my opportunity." It wasn't long before another hint of my plan's potency emerged. A minor slip by Marlene revealed an unexpected alliance, someone she had been secretly working with to manipulate accounts and influence family decisions. She believed I didn't know, but I did. And this information gave me leverage I hadn't anticipated initially. The next confrontation came unexpectedly during a quiet moment at a local coffee shop where I had met a neutral family advisor. Richard and Marlene were there, pretending to be coincidental visitors, but their glances, their whispers, their subtle adjustments all betrayed their awareness. Richard's voice, low and sharp, carried through the cafe. "She's on to us. I can see it in her eyes. She's planning something."
Marlene's tone was equally tense. She has no idea what she's dealing with, but we can't let her escalate. We have to control this. I sipped my coffee, allowing the moment to unfold. They didn't know I had already accounted for every contingency. I let their whispers and unease simmer like a pot on low heat. Their overconfidence was crumbling, slowly, predictably, and I could feel the tension feeding my resolve. Back at Clara's apartment that night, I laid out the next steps of my plan. The hidden advantage wasn't just the documents and photographs, it was the awareness of their overconfidence, the knowledge that they assumed I was powerless, the fact that they underestimated my patience and foresight. I had time on my side, and I intended to use it carefully. Clara asked cautiously, "Mom, do you really think this will work? That we can actually expose them without destroying everything?" I nodded, placing a hand over hers. "Clara, it's about timing. It's about precision. If we act too soon, we risk collapse. If we act too late, they may regain control. But I've observed, I've collected, and I've planned. When the moment is right, the truth will be undeniable." That night, as I lay awake, I reflected on the years of betrayal, manipulation, and emotional abuse. Richard and Marlene had believed they could control the narrative, silence me, and dictate Clara's life. But they hadn't accounted for one thing: my resilience, my patience, and my determination to protect my daughter. The suspense was building. Every subtle maneuver, every hint of observation, every carefully timed interaction was a move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And in that suspense, I found clarity. They would not see the final outcome coming, not until it was too late. I began to notice how their overconfidence was becoming their weakness. A small remark from Richard, a casual laugh from Marlene, even the way they assumed others would shield them from exposure, they were unraveling without realizing it. And I made a note of everything. Every misstep, every slip of arrogance, every assumption of control, it would all be used strategically. By the end of that week, the tension had escalated to a point where it was palpable in every family interaction. Richard and Marlene were wary, their confidence faltering. I could see it in their eyes, in their posture, in the way they spoke around Clara and me. The storm was approaching, and the hidden plan, the carefully preserved evidence and strategy, was quietly gathering power. The final mini cliffhanger arrived when a late-night call from an unknown number revealed yet another secret. Someone within Richard's circle was ready to come forward, offering corroboration of financial misdeeds and manipulation. The timing was perfect, the alignment unexpected, and the suspense unbearable. I didn't know all the details yet, but I could feel the pieces falling into place. And as I ended the call, I whispered to myself, quietly, with certainty and calm, "They have no idea what's coming." The hidden plan was no longer just a thought or an idea. It was a living, breathing strategy growing stronger with each passing day. Richard and Marlene believed they had the upper hand, but in truth, they were walking blind into a carefully orchestrated revelation. The suspense was at its peak, and the moment of reckoning, the reveal of truth, justice, and exposure was drawing nearer. For the first time in decades, I felt a sense of control and anticipation, unlike anything I had experienced. The betrayals, the lies, the manipulations, they were all about to come crashing down, and I would be the one standing steady, guiding Clara and finally claiming the justice that had eluded me for so long. The storm was ready, the pieces were in place, and when the moment arrived, Richard and Marlene would realize, far too late, that they had underestimated the mother they had tried so hard to silence. The morning of the reckoning arrived quietly, deceptively calm. Sunlight streamed through Clara's apartment, casting a golden glow over the documents and evidence I had meticulously organized. I sat at the table, sipping tea, letting the silence settle around me. It was the calm before the storm, the perfect moment to strike. Clara sat across from me, her hands clasped, eyes bright but nervous. "Mom, today feels different," she said softly. "It is," I replied, voice steady, eyes scanning the papers. "Today, the truth comes to light. Today, Richard and Marlene realize that control is an illusion when the person they've underestimated has patience, strategy, and evidence." The first move was subtle, but devastating. I sent a carefully worded email to Richard, Marlene, and the family attorney, CCing a few trusted witnesses, inviting them to a private meeting to clarify matters regarding family finances and agreements. The message was polite, neutral, almost casual, but beneath the surface, it carried the weight of exposure. Within minutes, confirmations started rolling in. They had no idea what awaited them. They assumed it was another routine discussion, another attempt at control. They had no idea the tide had turned. When they arrived, Richard's confident smile was already faltering. Marlene's polished demeanor wavered just slightly. They didn't know it yet, but the documents, the evidence, the corroborating testimonies, they all awaited them, ready to dismantle the narrative they had so carefully built. I welcomed them calmly. "Good morning," I said, voice soft but firm. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to have a transparent discussion about matters that affect our family, Clara, and the legacy we all share." Richard tried to mask his unease. "Evelyn, we can handle this calmly. No need to dramatize," he said, glancing at Marlene. I smiled faintly, letting the calm confidence do the work. "No drama, Richard, just truth." And then I began laying out the evidence. The documents, photographs, and financial records slid across the table. Each piece meticulously highlighted manipulation, lies, and misappropriations. I narrated it calmly, deliberately, letting each revelation sink in slowly. Marlene's eyes widened as she tried to mask her shock. This is impossible," she whispered, voice trembling. "It is not impossible," I said softly, voice steady. "It is real, and it has been hidden far too long, but no longer." Richard's hand trembled as he reached for a document, trying to assert control, but his words faltered. "Evelyn, these records, are they legitimate?" I looked at him evenly. "Every single one is legitimate. Every action, every transaction, every attempt at manipulation, all documented and corroborated. They were never meant for me to see, but I did, and now the truth is undeniable." Marlene desperately tried to interrupt. You can't just, we, stop," I said calmly, holding up a hand. "You've had decades to manipulate, twist, and control. But truth doesn't bend, and lies, no matter how carefully constructed, crumble when faced with patience, foresight, and evidence." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Their overconfidence had evaporated, replaced with shock, fear, and the creeping realization that they were finally exposed. Clara stepped forward, eyes bright, voice steady. "Mom, she's telling the truth. I've seen it too. I should have noticed sooner, but now it's clear. You've protected me, Mom, and you've protected our family from deceit. I can't thank you enough." Marlene's face drained of color. "Clara, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Clara replied firmly, "that Mom has uncovered everything you've tried to hide, and I stand with her." Richard's shoulders slumped, his confident facade completely shattered. Evelyn, this isn't what I expected," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "No," I said softly, leaning back. "It's not what you expected because you believed I would remain silent. You believed I was powerless, but the truth has a way of catching up, and today it has." The final blow came when I revealed the hidden financial agreement I had discovered weeks ago. The document shifted the balance of control in Clara's favor entirely, giving her, and by extension me, the undeniable upper hand. It was legal, binding, and completely unexpected by Richard and Marlene. They had assumed it was buried, inaccessible, irrelevant. They had no idea how it would change everything. Marlene gasped, clutching her pearls, as realization dawned. "No, this can't be. I thought it was lost. I thought—" Richard leaned back, silent, defeated. The arrogance and overconfidence that had defined him for decades had collapsed, and I sat there quietly, calm, collected, letting the full weight of the moment settle. "Let this be a lesson," I said softly, voice unwavering, "that underestimating someone you've wronged, silenced, or betrayed carries consequences. You believed the story was yours to control. You were wrong, and the truth always finds its way." The room remained silent for several moments. Even Clara's friends who had watched the exchange unfold could feel the intensity of the revelation. The villains of the story, the ones who had plotted, lied, and manipulated, were finally confronted with undeniable evidence of their wrongdoing. For the first time in decades, I felt an unshakable sense of peace. The betrayal, the humiliation, the lies, all confronted and exposed. I looked at Clara, who met my gaze with pride and relief. "Mom, you did it. You've finally shown them," she whispered. "Yes," I replied quietly, voice steady, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Yes, we've finally shown them, and now we can move forward, stronger, wiser, and free from deception." Even as Richard and Marlene struggled to grasp the reality of their downfall, I knew that the long years of betrayal had finally reached their natural conclusion. Justice had been served, not through anger or revenge, but through patience, strategy, and the undeniable power of truth. And as I left the meeting, walking hand in hand with Clara, the tension that had haunted our lives for decades began to lift. The storm had passed, the hidden plan had succeeded, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe freely, knowing that the mother who had once been sidelined had finally reclaimed her power, her dignity, and her voice.
The days that followed the confrontation felt surreal. Richard and Marlene were quiet, withdrawn, avoiding family gatherings, phone calls, and even casual visits. They had been stripped of the facade they had spent decades cultivating. For the first time, the family saw them as they truly were, not polished, not confident, not untouchable, but exposed and vulnerable. Clara and I moved carefully, mindful of how fragile the situation remained. There was no gloating, no petty satisfaction in seeing them stumble. Instead, there was a profound sense of relief, a release from the weight of years of manipulation. The truth had been revealed, and for the first time, the family could breathe freely without the constant shadow of deceit. One afternoon, Clara suggested a small family gathering, not to celebrate, but to reset, to reclaim the warmth and trust that had been lost over the years. I agreed, seeing the wisdom in creating a controlled environment where honesty could be acknowledged and strengthened. Richard and Marlene arrived, subdued, their usual arrogance replaced with uneasy compliance. I greeted them calmly, letting the silence speak louder than words. Clara stood by my side, radiating quiet strength. Together, we had reclaimed the balance that had been stolen from us for so long. The conversation began cautiously, Richard attempting to salvage his dignity. "Evelyn, I suppose there's no point in arguing anymore," he said quietly. "I see now that we misjudged you." I nodded, voice calm, steady. "Yes, you misjudged me, and you misjudged the power of patience, observation, and truth. But misjudgment doesn't have to destroy relationships. It can be a lesson." Marlene looked at me,
her eyes wide, the reality of exposure and the legal ramifications settling in. I didn't realize, she whispered, almost pleading. You didn't realize because you assumed silence would protect you. But truth doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be seen. And now it has been seen. Clara spoke next, her voice clear and firm. Mom has shown us that honesty, integrity, and vigilance matter. We can move forward, but only if we acknowledge the past and commit to transparency from now on. For the first time, Richard and Marlene looked small, humbled by the quiet power of accountability. The shift was palpable. The family had been fractured for years by their manipulation, but in that moment, the possibility of repair emerged, not through coercion or threats, but through truth. Over the next few weeks, I helped orchestrate the necessary changes to correct financial mismanagement, clarify inheritances, and ensure that Clara's well-being was fully protected. Every step was deliberate, measured, and backed by the evidence we had gathered. Richard and Marlene had no choice but to comply. Their leverage had evaporated, leaving them powerless. The emotional closure was perhaps the most satisfying part. Clara came to me one evening, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Mom, you didn't just protect me from them. You protected my future, my sense of security, my understanding of who our family really is. I can't thank you enough. I held her hands, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Clara, the thanks isn't necessary. Seeing you safe, seeing the truth revealed, that is enough. In the quiet moments that followed, I reflected on everything. The betrayals, the years of marginalization, the careful planning that had finally brought justice. It had been a long, painful journey, but one I had navigated with patience, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Richard and Marlene, meanwhile, retreated into private lives, stripped of the influence they had long exploited. Their arrogance, their cruelty, and their manipulation had been exposed. The family watched as they struggled to reclaim dignity in the aftermath, powerless to reverse the damage caused by their own actions. And yet, I felt no malice toward them, only the quiet satisfaction of justice fulfilled. They had underestimated me for decades, and that underestimation had become their undoing. Clara and I rebuilt the bond that had been threatened by deceit and manipulation. Together, we created a foundation stronger than any lies, more resilient than any betrayal. The storm had passed, leaving clarity, trust, and the reassurance that the truth, once uncovered, has the power that no manipulation can withstand. In the end, the lesson was clear. Patience, foresight, and unwavering adherence to truth can dismantle even the most carefully constructed facades. Justice does not always arrive in dramatic bursts. It often arrives quietly, methodically, and with precision. And when it does, the consequences for those who have chosen deception are unavoidable. I looked at Clara one last time before closing the family estate files. "We've done it," I said softly. "The past is confronted, the lies exposed, and the future belongs to those who choose honesty." She smiled, tears glimmering. "Mom, you've given me so much more than justice. You've given me strength, courage, and clarity. I will never forget what you've done." I hugged her tightly, the warmth of that embrace washing away years of fear, pain, and uncertainty. For the first time in decades, I felt unshakable peace. The battle was over, the villains humbled, and the family restored to truth and transparency. And in that certainty, I finally felt free.